Hey, so I'm asked fairly often about reversing the effects of hard mewing, and essentially a lot of different symptoms are given for hard mewing and like what it's causing in people. And as a blanket response, I think we can say that whoever's feeling that they've hard mewed and they got a result that they don't want and they want to reverse it, essentially what we would propose is that you use the opposite muscle groups in order to if you pushed up very hard and you don't like what that's resulted in, perhaps you feel it's jammed up the bone structure in some way and you want to reverse that and pull it down, then this is going to be teaching you how to do that. And this is also going to be putting you a little bit into whole body breathing theory because we believe that the downward pull is actually crucial to growth. That's not to say that there should not be any upwards and forwards pressure at all, but that it has to be balanced with a pull down because the nasomaxillary complex actually grows down and forward in this way. So if you pushed up really hard with your tongue for a long time and things got jammed up and you want to reverse it, or if you want to learn whole body breathing and deepen your understanding of this, what you're gonna do is you're gonna find your hyoid bone. First, I'm gonna explain to you everything, and then we're gonna go over theory. So I'll just explain the practice first, okay? You're gonna feel around. So let's start at your chin, okay? You got your chin, this is hard, right? Then you're gonna go further back. This is all soft tissue. Soft, right? It's all tongue. Now you might feel some parts are harder, but they're still soft. Okay? It's soft tissue. Until you're gonna get to somewhere that very much feels like a bone. This is hyoid bone. Underneath that's gonna be your larynx. Okay? So you can go the other way too. You can feel for your larynx. Don't use a lot of force when you're doing any of this sort of stuff. But you can feel for your larynx, and then at the top of it, where that ends, that's pretty much gonna be your hyoid bone. And if you keep your fingers there and move your tongue around, you can feel it moving up around, right? It's bouncing around. Now, I mean, another good way to locate it would just be to look at yourself in the mirror, move your tongue around, notice the bump. There you go. There's your hyoid bone. Okay. Now, this is actually the back third of your tongue. So when I believe John Mew speaks about back third, because John and Mike don't necessarily, they're trying to get the answers, right? And as we try to get answers to fixing craniofacial dystrophy, there's going to be multiple theories that come out. I think John Mew is more of the opinion that this is around the back third of the tongue, okay? And this is also my opinion that the back third of the tongue is back here because this is where your tongue begins, okay? So now that I've told you where this is, your job, not only during this video, but after as well, is to actually pay attention and focus there and start waking up the sensory perception that you have there. So right off the bat right now, I want you to just gently keep your fingers there and move your tongue around, up and down, and feel for the muscle, the muscle that's back here. For some people, it might wake up quite quickly. For you, you might need to close your eyes, focus, pay attention inside. You have muscle attachment points here that are lifting up the hyoid. They'll lift it up and drop it. Okay, you can see there's actual physical movement happening. So for a lot of us, our bicep, we're going to be more aware of the bicep. So if I do this, I can feel the bicep. Okay, you're more aware of that. You have proprioception here too. You have feeling here too. Pay attention to it, and you're going to be able to get a feeling for that back third of the tongue. Okay, it's not just here, it goes up and then it becomes your tongue. So this entire region, this entire area, back third. Okay, once you start waking that up, now what I want you to do is to actually pull your hyoid up and back. So this back third of your tongue, pull it to the back. Pull it towards your temporal bones or just the back of your skull. Okay, just pull it back. You have musculature here, which I'm going to show you in a bit. Okay, you have musculature here, which is going to pull everything backwards, the hyoid and the tongue back. And if you already have a lot of perception here, if you spend time doing this, this can actually give you a very solid push on the mid face as well, pulling back with the back third of the tongue, which is why I propose that this back third being up and back is really what we're doing with mewing. Okay. Now, as you practice that, I want you to go ahead and just look at the screen, and I'll explain more about the theory and the anatomy so that you get a better understanding of what we're doing. Okay. So this right down here is the hyoid that we've been focusing on. This is the back third of the tongue, so it starts at the hyoid. Okay. Then you also have this musculature, which is connecting up into the styloid process, so into your temporal bone. So when I'm saying pull the back third up and back, this is what's going to be doing it. Okay, and then if this musculature is working, you're now working directly on your cranial base because the temporal bone is a part of the cranial base. And when people do whole body breathing and when they start waking this up, they start getting cracks and pops and adjustments in the temporal bone and the cranial base, sort of doing a self craniosacral therapy, a self craniosacral osteopathy. Okay, so if you can get a feel for your hyoid, and then if you your ear reach up behind your ear, you feel this bump. Okay, that's your temporal bone. That's your mastoid process of the temporal bone. Okay, so if you can kind of picture, it's not going to be at the mastoid process, but in that general area, you can even dig a bit deeper. That there's a connection from here to here, because there is, and use that connection to pull back the hyoid and pull back your tongue. So your back third is not going up; it's going diagonally back. Okay, and essentially what we are trying to do with the whole body breathing understanding is that all of this musculature, the deep neck musculature, needs to wake up and start exerting its proper force on your cranial base, your palatine bones, your nasal maxilla. And if you've done hard mewing in some way that you think has caused an issue for you, if you think you've jammed up the bones here in some way, well, this would be the opposite force. Essentially, this would be a pull down force. You see how essentially this back third complex, because everything's interrelated, everything meshes into each other. So this back third complex becomes your palatine like musculature, the levator palatine, stuff like that. Like it all combines up into one mass. Okay. And so to if you jammed up this area, then activating this musculature, okay, a core part of whole body breathing understanding is okay, if this contracts and pulls up the hyoid, well, what would happen if we don't really move the hyoid, but we contract this musculature anyways? Well, it would be pulling on the temporal bone, or it'd be pulling down on the palatine bones, or it'd be pulling down on your palate, which would be essentially the opposite of what hard moving might have done if you jammed up stuff here. And since the nasomaxillary complex growth is down and forward and counterclockwise, counter I know this is actually clockwise on this image. So on this image, clockwise. Okay, so the nasomaxillary complex, as per Enlow's theory of growth, grows down and forward, and as it does so, it rotates like this. So the front third of the tongue pushing up is fine because it's supposed to rotate, but this back third is rotating this whole area down like this, unjamming these sutures because the nasomaxillary complex grows at the back. Your maxilla doesn't grow from the front, it grows from the back. So if we pull this down and back here, that would be the proper growth pattern, actually. And this is what, getting your back third of the tongue up is essentially, so to pull this up, you need to pull this down because there's a counteractive force. It's like a rubber band, right? All these muscles are like rubber bands, the fascial system like rubber bands. So if you pull this up, then correspondingly, this must all get pulled down. Okay. So it's just more to show that this is all your tongue, back third of the tongue is all connecting up into your cranial base system and the deeper nasal maxilla, and that's where really the changes are going to happen, and that's where, according to Enlow's theories of growth, this is really where the growth of the nasal maxilla happens. Okay. This is going to include things like essentially say you want forward maxillary growth. Um, if this musculature is not working properly, if this is too tight, it's literally preventing your maxilla from developing forward. Okay. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going on, but this complex here that's at the top of your airway, that back of your soft palate, you need to start waking that up. You can even feel this actually. This is at the back of your mouth. And if you take your tongue back there, you can might even be able to feel these protrusions. Okay, these are your palatine bones, and this is your sphenoid. This is like right at the center of your cranial base. So if you want to adjust the skull, you want cranial adjustment. If you want nasomaxillary correction and airway correction, this is your airway here too, by the way, right? So if you want airway correction and all this correction, we've been working in many fields way too much up here. You need to. This is where we need to be working. The deeper fascia, the deeper tissue, the nasomaxilla. Okay. And so if you feel like you did some hard mewing, you push this up hard too much, this is the sort of musculature that will counteract that. It'll pull it back into position. And I think the theory is that breathing properly, that all of this musculature should function in a rhythmic way in order to promote bone growth because rhythmic movement drives bone growth. Just this is just to further show that getting this back third up does activate essentially it will start waking up this complex. And I hope as you're listening to me, you're not just listening. You have to practice this. Okay? Like sometimes it'll click. Sometimes I'll be explaining something and it'll click right away, especially if you've been practicing however you've been practicing before. Um but when you get a little bit of sensation, that's not where it stops. If you actually stay there, if you stay with the sensation, more and more of it will wake up. In the same way that if your arm falls asleep, okay, your leg falls asleep, it doesn't wake up all at once. It starts tingling first. You start getting a little bit of feeling, and then more and more feeling comes. And so when you're doing this sort of stuff, you're going to get a little bit of feeling first, and then don't stop there. You have to stay with it and actually be able to feel all of this very in depth and feel the connections that you have. If you want to feel this musculature really well, pay attention to the connection points at the back top of your airway, at the sides of your head. That's where the muscle is going to tug on, and that's where you can feel the pull. And when you can really feel the pull from here to the back, tugging back hard, you're likely going to feel it in your maxilla as well. Okay, just go to continue showing you that this musculature and bone is all connected, right? So you want to develop your maxilla, but you don't want to develop your palatine bone. Your palatine bone is in the max. It's an upper limit really, and that's what happens a lot. You get alveolar ridge expansion, and a lot of treatments. What they do is they essentially just they expand your alveolar ridge, which is this down here, which is what the teeth sit in, but they're not doing anything to work on your palatine bones or the sphenoid, things like that. Like this is a hard limit. Your maxilla is not going to expand past the point where your palatine bones are going to let it expand. So you want craniofacial correction, you got to work back here. And this is where we are working this, where the back third of your tongue's coming up and connecting up into this entire area. Okay, as we see here, this is where we need to be working. Okay, so you go from your frontal bone, sphenoid, palatine bones, and your nasal maxilla hangs off of that. So just movement here is not enough. You got to expand this. We actually need expansion up here too, in the frontal bone and the sphenoid. Okay. So just to show how the palatine bones are hanging off of your sphenoid, and this is the sphenoid right here. This is the upper limit. Okay, so if this is your maxilla up here, your sphenoid needs to be wider if you really want like a properly wider maxilla, not just a wider alveolar ridge. Okay. And how the whole craniofacial complex comes together. You got your sphenoid, your palatine bones, and your maxilla. So if you're somebody who you think like you pushed up too hard on the maxilla, you pushed up too hard doing like a hard mewing or something like that. By the way, this sort of looks like an owl, which I find interesting. And it kind of looks like your hips as well. This sort of as above, so below understanding is what whole body breathing's really predicated on. But if you think you push this up too hard, okay, and you jammed up this area, well, to reverse it, essentially you would use the musculature that pulls down on it, which is what whole body breathing proposes is the proper mechanism at the back here. That every breath you're going to be tugging down. But manually, what you're going to do right now to wake it up, you're going to manually pull up that hyoid, pull up the back third of your tongue. If you do it really well, you should feel it in your nasomaxilla. You should feel it in your cheekbones. Okay? And you'll feel the connections to the roof of your mouth getting pulled down. Okay? We have communities that are discussing all of this. We have a lot of people practicing, getting pops and adjustments in their nasomaxilla and cranium. And we have trainings to get further into this as well. So I hope to see you in all of those.